My name is Stannon Robert. I work as a salesperson for a business that has a strong presence in the neighborhood. I'll be turning 28 this year. However, I did not grow up in this city. As soon as I graduated from high school, I headed straight here, leaving my hometown behind. The boss who helped me develop into the guy I am today and hired a high school graduate like me has my sincere gratitude. Back in the day, I had quite a reputation as a troublemaker in my hometown. You could say I was a bit of a wild child. I had a thing for motorcycles, and I was pretty darn good in a fight, too. Or rather, I guess I just hated losing. After all, you can't lose a fight if you don't admit defeat. However, my wild antics definitely caused some headaches for my folks and teachers back home. These days, I'm all reformed, respectable member of society. I don't go back to my hometown often, but each time I reach out, I can tell my parents breathe a little easier. I've even started to send them a little money now and then. One day, after coming back from a client's place, I got a call from the boss. Apparently, he'd been waiting for me. I made my way to his office, where the ever white-haired man greeted me. I apologized for keeping him waiting as I lowered my head, but the boss just smiled and said, "No problem." This boss of mine is one of the good guys and is well known around town. He's deeply invested in community development and knows a lot of folks. People come to him for advice on all sorts of things, not just work-related, and he's always been incredibly caring. Despite having no ties to him, he took me under his wing like I was his own son. I was motioned to sit on the guest sofa, and as I did, the boss started to talk. "Sorry for being so sudden, but Robert, what do you think about matchmaking?" Huh. Caught off guard by the sudden proposal, all I could do was let out a puzzled sound. It's true my social life lacks a feminine touch, mainly because I haven't felt the need for it. To set the record straight, it's not like I can't attract the opposite sex. I just haven't felt like dating anyone. I still think I'm in the middle of getting my life back on track. I wasn't in the mood to get a girlfriend, but what the boss suggested wasn't just about introducing me to someone. It was about setting me up for marriage. Moreover, the introduction came from the boss, who was my benefactor. I felt anxious, wondering if there was any way out for me. I was trying to think of a way to decline, but my mind was all over the place, especially at a time like this. Listen, she's the daughter of the owner of Harris Enterprises. You've seen her a few times, haven't you? She shows up at Chamber of Commerce parties too. I'd seen the daughter of the head of Harris Enterprises before. She was well known in this part of town, but not because she was cute. She was famous for never smiling. It sounds good to call her a cool beauty, but she had zero sociability. Her beautiful eyes and well-proportioned face stood out even at the Chamber of Commerce parties. I'd always been friendly with Harris Enterprises and the boss, and I wondered if maybe the boss couldn't refuse them. She's about the same age as you. The president said he wanted me to introduce a good young man, and Robert, your face immediately came to mind. He said, handing over the marriage interview photo with a smile. When I opened the old-fashioned marriage interview photo, there she was, the daughter of the Harris Enterprises boss, dressed in a formal dress and sitting with a composed look on her face. She was definitely pretty and cute, but I thought I wouldn't like such an unsociable woman. I have my ideals too. A homey, cute girl with a smile. I like girls who eat well. The girl in the photo didn't look like she ate at all. She looked so out of this world that I thought she might be eating mist or something. I think I'm not worthy. I tried desperately to decline with a non-committal phrase. What do you mean? Are you saying my eyes are clouded? There's no one more suitable than you, is there? The boss showed no signs of backing down. In the end, I was overruled by his, "Why don't you at least meet her?" I agreed to the marriage interview. Seeing the boss's happy face, I started to feel a pain in my stomach. The date for the marriage interview was set immediately, and I bought a new suit with the money the boss gave me. I wanted to decline the suit, but the boss told me not to destroy his reputation. so I ended up buying it. On the day of the marriage interview, I entered a high-class restaurant in a brand new suit. I had a sharp pain in my stomach from nervousness since morning. I hadn't told my parents about the marriage interview because I planned to decline somehow. The boss was sitting with me as a substitute for my parents. After a while of sitting, the landlady of the restaurant appeared and announced, "Your party has arrived." The face of Harris Enterprises' boss came into view, and following behind him was his daughter, dressed formally. Seeing her up close, her skin was like porcelain and her beauty was otherworldly. I was taken aback. "Sorry to keep you waiting. This is my daughter. Her name is Nora," President Harris introduced. She slightly retracted her chin and nodded to me. Of course, there was no smile on her face. Instead, I was startled by the sharpness of her gaze as she quietly looked at me. In the end, the marriage interview was mostly the two bosses talking while Nora and I focused on eating. It was a very uncomfortable space. Finally, with dessert served, the bosses left the table together, saying, "Now it's up to the young people." This was a common sight at marriage interviews. As soon as the two of them left, Nora, who had been silent until then, spoke. "Do you want to get married?" Her sudden aggressiveness made me momentarily angry. Who talks like that? I'd always taken fights head-on if offered, and I wasn't about to back down now. Her icy gaze pierced me as I retorted, "The marriage interview was your parents' idea, wasn't it? You could have put it more tactfully. You were silent the whole meeting. Were you trying to embarrass my boss?" She didn't take kindly to my words, and we exchanged pointed remarks. She clearly resented my attitude, and I couldn't stand her air of superiority. It was a clash of personalities that ended with the landlady having to intervene. The marriage interview concluded on a sour note, and I figured she would be the one to reject me. Even so, there was something about her strength and determination that lingered in my mind. Days passed without a rejection. Then, during my lunch break, I was summoned to the boss's office. To my surprise, he informed me that there was a date invitation from Nora. I was genuinely shocked. After such a huge fight, I expected her to want nothing to do with me. This had to be some kind of prank. I left the boss's office, still reeling, a note in my hand with the date and time of the next meeting. To cope with my nerves, I asked a colleague to join me for drinks that night. At the bar, I found out that my marriage interview had become office gossip. I shared the story of my argument with Nora, and my colleagues jokingly warned me, "You're going to get fired." That thought chilled me, so I drank more than I had in a long time. A junior female colleague did her best to support me as I staggered towards the subway station. In my drunken haze, I spotted Nora in the crowd. Our eyes met, and she expressionlessly flashed me the middle finger. Provoked, I felt my blood boil. As I stumbled along, unable to look away, she lifted her skirt just enough to reveal the pristine white of her stockings, then grinned wickedly. Just then, I slammed my head into a corner wall. "Watch out, you're going to hurt yourself," my colleague said as I crumpled, clutching my throbbing head. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Nora smirking. So, she can smile, I thought, grumbling to myself. Oddly enough, I didn't feel angry. I found myself intrigued by her audacious personality. Despite dreading the follow-up date, I felt a flicker of anticipation. On the day of our meeting, I still had a bandage on my forehead. Nora's expression didn't change when she saw it. As soon as we sat down on a park bench, she repeated, "Do you actually want to get married?" Hearing the same blunt question again, I realized there was more to this matchmaking than met the eye. "If there's a reason, I can help," I said. "Would you mind sharing it with me?" Her eyes widened at my seriousness. After a deep breath, she began to speak. The marriage interview had been her idea. She'd been in a long-term relationship with her first love, but both he and her best friend betrayed her. Deeply wounded, she wanted to prove herself, to show that she didn't need them. Her story left me stunned but sympathetic. Betrayed by people she trusted and left to navigate life alone, she carried a heavy burden. I'm a president's daughter, so it'd be like you're marrying up, she continued seriously. I'd treat your parents well. If you want, we can even divorce when it suits you. She was desperate to convince me, her face dead serious. She desperately tried to persuade me. I guessed she was this determined because she still couldn't forget her first love. Suddenly, I felt a strange affection for her. So much for her cool, aloof persona. In reality, she was just a girl struggling to move past heartbreak. I realized I wouldn't mind helping her, even if it was unconventional. After hearing her story, I found myself thinking, all right, I'll do it. Let's get married. At my response, her face lit up. Thank you, she said softly, a faint smile playing on her lips as she held back tears. Her conflicting emotions made her expression incredibly captivating, leaving me momentarily speechless. It's funny how certain moments can capture your heart. From there, our plans for marriage moved forward swiftly. Nora wanted to marry as soon as possible. When I informed my boss of our decision, he was overjoyed, even happier than he had been when his own son got married. I want to meet your parents, Nora declared one day as I started looking for wedding venues. She was insistent, and I had no choice but to agree. I hadn't returned to my hometown or visited my parents in years. For me, that place was a repository of embarrassing memories. I didn't want Nora to see parts of myself I had worked hard to leave behind. But she was unyielding. It was a necessary step. So we went. Returning to my family home was surprisingly emotional. Everything looked so familiar, yet my parents had aged more than I imagined. They seemed smaller and more fragile. My mom wept at the sight of me, and my usually silent dad was clearly happy, though he showed it in his own quiet way. When I introduced Nora as my future wife, my mom was overwhelmed with joy. After meeting my parents, I took Nora to the family barn. She'd been adamant about seeing it. When her eyes landed on my old motorcycle, she lit up. "This is amazing," she exclaimed. It was an old bike, cherished during my student days. I was surprised she loved motorcycles and had a license for large ones. She stood staring at it for a while, then whispered, "Thank you." Later, as I showed her around my childhood neighborhood, she seemed deeply moved. "So, this is where you grew up," she said, looking out over the riverbank. Compared to the bustling city, my hometown was quiet and peaceful, perhaps a novelty for her. As we spent more time together, her demeanor softened, and she even flashed me a few shy smiles. I began to wonder if building a life together might bring more of those smiles. But I kept reminding myself, she wasn't marrying me out of love. I knew that. Still, as her laughter echoed one day while she teased me about my rebellious past, I felt a pang of hope that maybe things could change. One day, as we strolled along, we were interrupted by a familiar, gravelly voice. "Hey, is that you, Robert?" I turned to see Steve, an old friend from my wild days, flanked by younger punks. His features were rougher now, etched with years of hardship. I tried to brush it off. "Yes, but who are you again?" That set him off. The tension rose quickly, but my main concern was Nora's safety. To my surprise, she popped her head out from between us and laughed. "So it's true, you were a bad boy," she teased, clutching her stomach in laughter. Steve's anger evaporated, replaced by confusion and finally a peaceful smile as he looked at Nora. "This is the woman I'm going to marry," I said. Steve nodded, and suddenly, I remembered who he was, my ex-girlfriend's brother. The realization froze me. He gently patted Nora on the shoulder. "Be happy with Robert." My sister would have wanted that. Then, with a heavy air of resignation, he walked away, his slouched form a reminder of the past he carried. As I stood there, dazed, Nora took my arm. "Should we visit your ex-girlfriend and her brother?" she asked. Shocked, I wondered how she knew so much. I had left my hometown, and everything tied to it, after a motorcycle accident that took my girlfriend's life. She had been on a bike trying to reach me at the police station, and a young, unlicensed driver had struck her. I never forgave myself. My dad would have looked into your past, Nora admitted. But why agree to marry me? I asked, the weight of the memories and her knowledge pressing down on me. And yet, despite everything she knew, she still stood by me. How did this match even happen? By all accounts, I had been a nuisance, hadn't I? Didn't her father consider the harm this could do to his daughter? Times change, my dad understands that now. And so do I, she retorted, her voice tinged with frustration. I scratched my head, realizing the depth of Nora's father's understanding. Perhaps growing up with such a parent had made her as compassionate as she was. The next day, I visited the graves of my ex-girlfriend and best friend, with Nora standing by my side. Her hands folded in silent prayer. When I asked what she was saying, she simply answered, "I was telling them about our marriage." With a soft chuckle, I teased, "I'm taking Robert." But Nora, with her serious face, turned and began to walk away. I stood stunned, unsure of what had just happened. Then she turned back and reached out her hand to me. I took it. For the first time, we held hands. Her palm was slightly sweaty, likely from her own nerves, but her face remained calm, as always. When I gently squeezed her hand, she looked down, offering me a small, shy smile. That shy smile was endearing, and in that moment, I wished she would open up to me more. We walked hand in hand down the sunset road, lost in our own thoughts. 6 months after meeting my parents, we were finally on the eve of our wedding. Nora was still a grad student and surprisingly busier than I was with my job. "You're free to do whatever you want on your last night as a bachelor," she said, as we met at a cafe. My coworkers had invited me out for drinks, but I wasn't particularly excited about my last night as a bachelor. What worried me more was that Nora might have cold feet at the last moment. Unaware of my concerns, Nora seemed upset. "Do you know them?" she asked, her tone shifting. As I turned to look, a man in a suit and a trendy-looking woman entered the cafe. The man locked eyes with Nora, and a distasteful grin spread across his face as he walked over to our table. "Long time no see. So, you're getting married. Huh," he said, speaking as if we were old friends, though his eyes were anything but friendly. He was good-looking, but there was a dangerous air about him. "Tomorrow is our wedding," Nora replied. "It's a small ceremony for our families only. This is Robert, my soon-to-be husband." I nodded slightly and muttered a quick, "Hi," but the man looked at me like I was something repulsive. The woman beside him seemed anxious as she glanced between us. "So, you're being shipped off to a husband so soon? Is this an arranged marriage, or just a way to get back at me?" His words were deliberately provocative, but Nora, as always, remained calm. She cast her eyes downward, seemingly ignoring his harsh comments. I, however, couldn't let it slide. I glared at him, my tension rising. "Are you trying to pick a fight with my wife, or with me?" I snapped. "What are you going to do about it? So what if it's an arranged marriage? Nora is the woman I chose. She's too good for you." Tom's face went pale. Layla, the woman with him, tugged on his sleeve, whispering something in his ear. "Stop it," she said. "You're really going to marry this uncool man? Don't expect to be happy." With that, Tom spat out a petty parting shot and hurried out of the cafe, as though fleeing the scene. Nora stared after him, stunned, then turned to look at me. Her intense gaze made me uncomfortable. Unable to bear her scrutiny any longer, I turned my gaze away, but she placed her hands on my cheeks and turned my face back toward hers. "Do you love me?" she asked quietly, her eyes searching mine. Caught off guard, panic surged through me. My body temperature rose, and irrational anger mixed with confusion. I didn't know how to answer her. Her question felt like a challenge, and my frustration spilled out before I could stop it. What a clueless woman, I muttered under my breath. Her face fell, and she gave my cheek a firm pinch. Ouch. Ouch. Stop it, I said, trying to laugh it off, but I was embarrassed. I just like you, okay. I never said you had to love me back. The pinch finally stopped, but my brief relief vanished when she swiftly slapped both of her hands onto my cheeks. I winced at the sting, my eyes watering. Why do I have to endure this? She asked. I was stunned. How could she be so clueless, yet so sincere? My own frustration turned inward as I realized I had been the one missing all the signals. I pinched my own cheek to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Her slap had really hurt. She stood before me, looking angry, but I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. Seeing her like that, right before our wedding, was something I would never forget. I felt bad. I apologized after recognizing that I had been the one who had misinterpreted her the entire time. I hadn't noticed the signs she had been giving me. Despite our disagreements, I knew we would be a happy pair when she stood next to me in a white wedding gown tomorrow. I was a fantastic fit with Nora.